Welcome, fellow horror hounds, and welcome to the latest episode of Talk and Stalk. I'm your host, Barry. This is my corrupted co-host, the sadist, Samuel.
Oh, thank you kindly, good sir. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, indeed, to your unholy home for horror. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most, I guess you could say, polarized films to come out at the end of the 20th century. The one that popularized the found footage genre.
And that, of course, is the Blair Witch Project, released back in 1999. It's 21 years old. And like Samuel said, it's a movie. It's certainly, to me, it probably is the most divisive horror film of all time. I know people that love this movie. I know people that actually hate this movie. But needless to say, you know, there's no denying the film was a huge commercial success, really thanks to top-notch marketing. The marketing was great. They really went all out with the marketing on this movie. And back in 99, you know, bearing in mind, this was kind of a new genre. I mean, Cannibal Holocaust came out 20 years prior to it, but obviously that wasn't a huge commercial success like this. So Blair Witch Project really kind of like opened the floodgates for many of these films to follow. What's your overall feelings on this film?
I understand and accept the importance of it with it popularizing, and I'm glad that you beat me to it with mentioning about Cannibal Holocaust, because the idea, you know, of point of view with using the camera, you know, that stretches all the way back to something like Michael Powell's Peeping Tom, but I'm not saying that's a key influence. Cannibal Holocaust uses the found footage to create a sort of as a method to represent flashbacks. The Blair Witch, on the other hand, was trying to sell it. Also capitalize on trying to sell it off as something is completely real. Now, it is very, I think it is very important. I think it is very effective. It doesn't necessarily mean I do like it. I mean, I think, you know, we revisited it recently and I still have a few objections to it.
Yeah, I mean, the Blair Witch Project, to me, it's a movie that I really appreciate it. I can fully understand why some people don't like it, but to me, you know, the vast majority, very few found footage films since the Blair Witch Project have really kind of conveyed that sense of authenticity to it. With the Blair Witch Project, I really felt like I was, you know, what I was watching was real people in a real situation. Now, you know, bearing in mind, back in 99, a lot of people went to the cinema thinking that what they were watching was real. It was just marketed in such a clever way. And obviously, let's face it, Samuel, the internet played a massive part in that.
Oh, it was an absolutely a powerful and a quite terrifying new technology to behold, because you know, back in the 80s, early 80s, late 70s, with the introduction to video, domestic home video, it allowed a new stretch to horror to add more a sense of authenticity to it. Hence, you know, the myth of snuff films, if you like. And I was speaking to someone who did go in thinking that what they were watching was essentially a sort of a form of snuff film, you know, presenting evidence that the supernatural was real. I mean, the marketing was unbelievable. In fact, the box office reflects on that very well. As you said, it made over $240 million. $148 million was in the US alone. And you think that films like, I'm not saying these are very good films, Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Evil Dead, which I think we do kind of like. You know, these are films that did well. They almost made $100 million in box office, but that most of that, you know, that wasn't even domestic. But you have Blair Witch, you know, over 100 million domestic. That's incredible.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's easy to see why that so many films looked to this movie as an inspiration, if you will, and it's so easy to see the whole found footage subgenre has become really kind of oversaturated with these movies, and it's easy to see why. They're generally cheap to make and they're almost guaranteed some degree of profit, whether it's cinema or DVD release or whatnot. Now, the Blair Witch Project, admittedly, it's still a film I like, but admittedly, much of its power has been lost due to the fact we now know, you know, it was big, you know, a big hoax, if you will, a big, you know, we were presented with the illusion that this was real, and once you know it isn't, it loses some of its power. But I still appreciate the film because it's very much a psychological horror film. There's no cheap jump scares, there's no special effects in this movie whatsoever, and I know that there's a lot of people out there, Samuel. I'm not sure if you're one of them people, but there's people out there who were just kind of watching this movie, just waiting for something to happen.
But that's the point. There isn't anything. There's nothing to really see. It's all about the horror of the things that you don't see, and maybe that's is simply just it. They were expecting something to see.
Yeah, I wouldn't say the Blair Witch Project is the most accessible of films. Certainly not. I mean, this movie actually only took 8 days to actually shoot. And obviously, I do believe it went on to become the most profitable movie of all time, actually, upon release.
Upon release, yeah, and then in terms of independence, I believe Get Out would then either surpass it or stretch to a similar level in terms of independent sort of success at the box office.
Yeah, I think to be honest, yeah, it was. I mean, it was certainly a movie that the directors actually. It relied heavily on one's imagination, for one's mind to actually kind of fill in some of the gaps, to fill in the gaps of this movie. Now, it's called the Blair Witch Project, but there is actually no glimpse of a witch in this movie. I do know that there's actually a moment in this movie where we were supposed to get a glimpse of the witch. And what happened was, during the filming, there was actually a crew member that was dressed up in a white gown at the top, and as they were running along, the cameraman, I can't remember who it was holding the camera, but they were supposed to pan up and to the left, and they forgot to, and instead of actually reshooting it, they just went ahead and carried on filming. So originally, they did actually want a glimpse of the witch in this movie, a quick glimpse.
Which is enough to actually ruin a film. Like when you present the monster, it's often the things that you don't know of, and there's things that aren't spoon-fed to you. Those are the things that tend to be scariest. However, some audiences do go along with that, some clearly don't.
Yeah, I mean, with this film, they like I said, I mean, watching this film, it felt like I was watching, there's a lot of angst with the, obviously you're watching real people in what feels like a somewhat realistic situation and that. From what I know, the actors were given less and less food each day to kind of heighten their anxiety, whatnot, if you will, their temperament. I do believe that they were actually, like, during the film, they seemed to be going round in circles. That was real as well. They were kind of felt like they were walking through these woods and actually getting nowhere. Now, I believe they actually were also told and informed that this was actually based on a real legend. Now, they knew the film was fake, but they actually thought there was something called a Blair Witch, which kind of probably, certainly added to their anxiety. I believe that, I'm not sure if the website's still going, but they were actually listed as missing for a long time, and as soon as IMDb this film shortly before the release, they were actually listed as missing, presumed dead on IMDb.
So, I mean, I think that's a very effective marketing. The thing is, I know they claim they didn't see Cannibal Holocaust, however, some of the marketing, okay, fine, they had the internet this time round. With that, though, they did sign with Cannibal Holocaust. They did sign a contract saying that they wouldn't appear out in public to advertise this film as well. So it's a very clever marketing. Now, we did talk about this. The characters, okay, fine, I will applaud improvised acting. I have no problem with that. And there's nothing wrong with having characters that are unlikable. It's just if there's a point in that. Now, we were talking... So, to bring up... I think I haven't shut up about this just yet. To go back to Cannibal Holocaust. Okay, so they go into the Green Inferno. They find this footage of the film crew that's been killed. They look at the footage and they go, "Oh, these people are absolutely horrible." There's a point, there's a reason to why they're unlikable, because, there's context to that. And then we were talking about a more recent found footage film, if you can call it as such. It's Unfriended. The teenagers are really unlikable, but that's kind of the point as the film goes on. Whereas I feel like with the Blair Witch, there are points where they were just sort of shouting at each other, which I think, in the context that it would have seemed more natural or that it was real, it would make perfect sense. However, when it's just a movie, it kind of, I think you should say, it sort of removes that sort of effect it would have had all that long time ago.
Yeah, it's... I mean, for me, with the Blair Witch Project, the setting certainly plays a huge important part in this movie. Now, You've seen this film more recently than me, so I'm kind of in a way... I mean, I've seen this film a few times, but admittedly it's been a long time. I definitely do need to rewatch it. But it was a movie that, uses its setting to pretty good effect, I found. But from what I know as well, this film, I only found this out recently, that a lot of the time they weren't even far from civilization. They were like only a few feet away from civilization on occasion.
Well, the Blair Witch Project helps to prove the fact that you can make good, pretty good stuff on next to nothing. And you think about the amount of films that are made in sort of someone's back garden or in the local park area. Like, they did a pretty damn good job to create that sense of claustrophobia, to create that sense of isolation. So you may not necessarily enjoy it. However, you've got to commend sort of that authentic illusion.
Yeah. I mean, that was... I mean, in a way, you could say this film was really kind of sold on its gimmick, in a way. Let's face it was the marketing that played... the marketing was responsible for this film's huge box office success. Because I also know that apparently it was actually filmed on a much higher resolution, and they actually degraded it purposely as well to try and give it that more...
They'd have to, because it's easier to manipulate. It's kind of like in most cases you'll shoot a film in colour and then in post-production you turn it to black and white. That way you can play with it's easier for you to manipulate and sort of alter, if you like, whereas if you shoot it on its intended format, my goodness, the processing is an absolute nightmare.
Yeah. I think the working title as well for this film was called The Black Hills Project. Doesn't sound quite as good, I've got to say. But yeah, cause I think definitely the directors clearly went all out to try and make this as uncomfortable and as stressful as they could for the cast, to try and give us a level of authenticity. I know that there's a scene in the tent where the tent's shaking, late at night scene. They were genuinely disturbed. They didn't know that was going to happen. I believe it was the director himself that was actually started shaking the tent violently, and it was a genuine reaction caught on film. The thing is, the Blair Witch Project, as we've said, does it hold up as well now, knowing what we know?
It depends on the context, I think, because in academia, like when you speak to the academics who specialise in horror films, like, oh yeah, they'll absolutely applaud it. As entertainment, probably not. I mean, I still find it difficult to how you could honestly get people to see Blair Witch. I'm not talking about the sequel, I'm talking about the one that came out about 5 years ago. Yeah,
it's called Blair Witch. There was Blair Witch 2 Book of Shadows, which came out in 2000, just the year after Blair Witch Project, but we're not going to... we're not going to talk about that. That film is one of the biggest messes and probably one of the worst, if not the worst film I've seen on the big screen.
But I think with the advancement of other found footage films, one of the best examples I have seen was The Borderlands, which is a group of supernatural busters, if you like. And one of the key differences they have this time around is they have the camera on their heads, so they sort of wear it wear it on top. So that fixes one of the biggest, I guess you could say, the flaws of devices with the found footage films. Why are they constantly carrying the camera as such? We watched Host the other day, the Shudder original. It's pretty good for 57 minutes. However, there are points where we were just commenting. Why are they carrying it?
You wouldn't in the real world. In this real world we live in, there's no way you'd be running for your life while still holding a camera. You would drop that camera. Unfortunately, it's the only way to tell the story, though. Unfortunately, it's the only way they can keep it going and that. But with the Blair Witch Project, there's no way. Let's remember as well that this film actually does have a somewhat iconic scene, actually, that was actually parodied in Scary Movie just the year after. It's where Heather Donahue is actually filming herself right up to the camera.
Yeah.
I'm scared to close my eyes, I'm scared to open them, and she's got the snot coming out of her nose. And
it's very iconic, I'll give you that. It's very effective. And the whole... that works, though. Within that illusion that it could be real, absolutely applaud it. I think that's the thing. It's something that you need to contextualise when it came out, how it was made. Funny enough, with that device flaw, there's one of the film... I'm not saying it's a I'm saying it's a very good film. It's a film called Hate Crime, directed by James Cullen Bressick.
Yeah.
Now that has the found footage approach as well, but it's the perpetrators recording it, so it causes some issues with censorship. However, it kind of makes more sense without the plot device. Just some examples of the found footage.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've actually just read something recently as well that I didn't realise. Now I know that the Blair Witch Project was very well received generally. Received a lot of praise. In a way it was kind of, a film that was very, very influential. It's actually got, I think, the highest Rotten Tomatoes score. Now, we're not going to go into this. Rotten Tomatoes is not gospel or anything like that.
You should always take it with a pinch of salt. I think we need to make that clear.
Yeah, at 85%, which, needless to say, is very high. It's the highest scoring film on Rotten Tomatoes to ever be nominated for a Razzie. For a Golden Raspberry.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think that actually, the whole Golden Raspberries thing, which is it's a crock, it's of a ceremony. However, that in itself shows the I guess not necessarily betrayal, but that just exemplifies the divisive nature of this film. I mean, how much people absolutely hated it. When you think about. Well, that's the thing, though. The Razzies tend to target the films that most people just generally just dislike. So it makes in a way, it makes sense. Does it deserve to have those nominations? I don't think so. I can see why they were nominated.
Yeah. I think, as we said earlier on, I think the Blair Witch Project, I would actually struggle to think of a horror movie that's more divisive. I really do. I haven't met many people that kind of sit on the fence. That it seems to be either you really like it or you really don't.
Yeah.
Now, there doesn't seem to be that much of a middle ground with this movie. I like the Blair Witch Project, but I fully respect and understand why some people don't like it. I think it's very much an acquired taste. But yeah, admittedly, it has lost a lot of its power because of, the marketing was the big part, so forth. Let's quickly talk about the ending, because the ending to this film, a lot of people were like, what the hell? What? The ending was very kind of ambiguous, but it goes back to something earlier on in the movie. You have to remember what a character said for the ending to actually have any meaning. Do you remember the ending? What's your take on the ending there?
Remind me of what the character said.
It's to do with, there used to be a killer called Rustin Parr that used to lead the children into the cabin, into the woods, and he would force one of them to face the wall while he killed the other.
Yes.
Well, at the end, when Heather Donahue runs in the cabin, her friend Mike is just stood there facing the wall, which of course is implying she's about to get killed. Rustin Parr, presumably the spirit, the Blair Witch, whatever you want to call it, is forcing him to face the wall while he kills Heather. That's what I took from the ending there.
Well, I did take on a similar take as well. I think it's very clear. I think that's the problem when you have the sequel coming about with Blair Witch. You kind of get an idea of the fate of these characters all these years on. So, but I think that I know that drove a few people mad with the ending, just because it just seemed so abrupt, or it seems nonsensical. It was a very abrupt ending. Some other films have done it. I mean, there was an absolutely, completely and utterly terrible ending to a film called The Devil Within, I believe it's called, or is it The Devil Inside? Which wasn't a very good film. When it does kind of pick up the pace a little towards the end, it just ends. There's a really bad anticlimactic ending. Is this the one that's produced by Eli Roth? No, I think Eli Roth endorsed it.
No, that's The Last Exorcism in 2010. That's good. I like that.
It's like a Rosemary's Baby rip-off, isn't it?
No, I think you're thinking The Last Exorcism.
No, I'm pretty sure The Devil Inside, there is something...
Or The Devil Within. It wasn't a good horror film, but it proved to be profitable. It made some good money at the box office.
One found footage that I think actually had an abrupt ending, which actually worked quite well, was Man Bites Dog.
Released in 92, Belgium. Yeah. Actually a Belgian movie. Yeah. Black and white.
Which is one of those rare, the found footage one tends to be dominated by the supernatural. There are very few cases in which it is grounded in reality, like August Underground, like Man Bites Dog, and so the Poughkeepsie tapes as well. Yeah. To bring that up as well. So I think I know the answer to this. I guess I just want to get your thoughts on this. Why do you think there's such a domination of the supernatural when found footage?
Why? Well, I think, to be honest, at the end of the day, supernatural is one of the most popular, along with slasher, one of the most popular subgenres anyway. It's the fear of the unknown. We're now getting a lot of these Skype, these webcam kind of films now, like you said earlier, with Unfriended.
Which actually I think is a better example, though. Friend Request was painful to watch. The Host, I think we quite liked as well. There was another one that you suggested. It wasn't necessarily a horror film per se. Searching, was it called?
Searching's a thriller. Searching, I actually think is one of the very best films of its type. It's a thriller, twists and turns, very well made and well crafted. The Borderlands. The Borderlands is a British found footage horror film that I really do like. I feel like it's a film that definitely doesn't get enough attention. It kind of flew under the radar. That's one that I'd recommend. There's some good found footage films out there. It's an incredibly oversaturated subgenre now, certainly, but that's going to happen. As soon as one of these films comes out and makes a lot of money, Halloween, we had about 700 slasher movies after that. All it takes is one film to prove to be successful. You're going to get a lot of things jumping on the bandwagon.
That's it. It's always very interesting when you get some of the masters of horror delving into these sort of trends. George Romero would end up doing that with Diary of the Dead.
Yeah, which unfortunately wasn't very good.
No, it was. It had a very interesting idea, had interesting themes. It just... I don't know, maybe it was too soon, perhaps. However, I mean... It was an interesting one, however, in terms of found footage, there are better ones, there are worse ones.
Rec is one of the best examples, which of course had an American remake called Quarantine. Rec 2 is a sequel that holds up really well to the first film. It's essentially, even says this on the poster, 28 Days Later meets the Blair Witch Project. It's a very claustrophobic, very intense zombie flick set in an apartment building. For anyone that hasn't seen that, I'd highly recommend that. There are some good found footage films, but without a doubt, Blair Witch Project is the one that kind of started it all.
I can imagine the sizzle reel for Rec when they were pitching it, just images of 28 Days Later and the Blair Witch. That must have been a hell of a sizzle reel. So, for better or worse, I mean, as American found footage, Blair Witch Project, for better or worse, brought something more popularised and something new to the table, even if it wasn't the first.
And quickly get on to Blair Witch, because I'm just going to pretend that Book of Shadows Blair Witch 2 doesn't exist. Blair Witch was okay. What it did, though, it basically tried to appease a more mainstream audience. It tried to make it more accessible. So whereas the original didn't have jump scares, this does have jump scares, and it's clearly on a bigger budget as well. It's handheld video, but obviously quality and that's better now with technology, etc. And it does throw in some effects there, certainly towards the end of the movie and that. But overall, I didn't think it was that bad. Okay, I thought the last 5 or 10 minutes of the film was actually quite creepy and quite intense, but I'm one of them big less is more kind of guys.
Yeah.
It showed a little bit too much for my liking right near the end of the movie, but overall, it was. I mean, I don't know if you remember seeing the first trailers for this film. It wasn't even known as Blair Witch. Nobody knew that this was a sequel to the Blair Witch Project. They just released little snippets of things going on in the woods and a woman in the tent, and they kept it very hush-hush that this was going to be a sequel to Blair Witch Project.
Oh, no, I remember some colleagues of mine, they were making a fuss about it, and they speculated about this, and then they went crazy as soon as it was officially announced.
Yeah, I believe The Woods. I remember seeing a trailer, and I'm pretty certain it was just kind of marketed as The Woods. And I myself, I wasn't expecting a Blair Witch, a Blair Witch 2 and whatever. But I think overall, personally, I like the Blair Witch Project. It's still one of my favourite found footage films. Not my favourite, but I think it's a film that, it's like you say, I mean, with this movie, I think you kind of, to fully appreciate, you had to be there at the time.
Yeah, I think that's like that with a lot of films, a lot of the classics, if you like, with like some of the ones that we've mentioned before, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, as well as The Exorcist. I mean, these films need to be kept in the context of their times and the methods that were used.
Yeah, with certain movies like this, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, they still have, a raw power to them, etc. We know that obviously Texas Chainsaw was very loosely based on Ed Gein as well as, a couple of other films. Yeah, I think The Blair Witch Project is a film that I definitely want to rewatch again. So overall, would you say it's a horror classic? Would you go that far?
Yeah, I'd say so. If people don't like it, they have to deal with it. My goodness, I mean, it's profitable and it was a game changer. Yeah, it deserves to be considered a horror classic.
I would agree. But if people don't like it, that's fine, up to them. We've all got our own opinion at the end of the day.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I think that concludes this episode of Talk and Stalk. Thanks to everyone for listening, and we'll be back again soon enough to haunt you, torment you, and do whatever else we'd like to do to you.